She stepped off the transport with boots soaked from the storm still clinging to her laces. The rain had followed her from Fort Jackson all the way to the red dust fields of Echo Base, where the sky always looked burnt and the wind carried sand. That scratched the skin like glass. She did not flinch. She did not speak. She adjusted her grip on the duffel and moved straight through the lines of soldiers who had paused their drills to stare as if they had seen a shadow. Not a person she was. Not what they expected. Her frame was lean, her stride sharp and silent, her eyes a kind of gray that seemed to swallow light, but still they smirked. One of the corporals with sleeves rolled up and biceps flexed as if for her benefit muttered something. Under his breath, something like, "Hey, look, the war sent us a secretary," and the others laughed too loud, too fake, and too fast, as if they all needed the sound to mask the unease crawling up their spines. But she kept walking her boots, making no more sound than the wind, and no one noticed how the sergeant at the checkpoint had gone, still had saluted her without even knowing why, as if his body remembered something his mind could not place. She made her way to the far barracks, the ones used for overflow and fresh blood, the ones that creaked in the wind and carried the smell of iron and old heat. She laid her gear down with precision, each item placed not for comfort, but readiness. Her bunk was in the corner facing both the door and the window. She never let her back face a wall unless she had checked it twice, and still she said nothing to the others, even when they threw glances at her gear, noting how it was different, older, more worn, but somehow cleaner, somehow used in places. Theirs were not. Her rifle looked standard, but moved with her like it was built from her bones. They watched her during morning drills and whispered to each other that her form was too perfect, her aim too calm, that no one shoots like that. Unless they are hiding something or have done things they are not proud of. One tried to catch her off guard with a question. During range training, asked her if she had ever even pulled the trigger outside a simulator, and she looked at him not with anger, not with insult, but with silence so heavy it made his throat dry. He laughed it off, said he was just playing around. But that night he took the long way around her bunk, even though he was 2 rows away. Then came the first test, a sudden call for a full combat exercise, the kind that starts with sirens in the dark and leaves boots running through mud before the sun thinks about rising. She was the first out the door, her gear on before the alert even ended, and no one saw her check a mirror or adjust anything because everything was already perfect, like she had been waiting for it, like she had known it was coming. And when they reached the edge of the training field, she was gone, not just missing from the group, but vanished as if the dust itself had swallowed her. They spread out. They ran protocols. They called out positions, but she was not in them. And then the sensors picked up movement fast, precise, looping behind the squad from angles they were not trained to expect. And then, one by one, the lasers tagged them each time from blind spots from cover they never saw, from distances they did not think were reachable. And then she stepped out from a ridge behind the command post. Rifle lowered, no words spoken, as the lights turned red across every helmet, and the commander walked out of his tent with a look that was not anger but something more like recognition. He stared at her, and then at the report in his hand, and for a long moment no one said a word. Not even the wind dared move, and then he told her to follow him. Just her, no one else, not even his XO. And they disappeared into the operations hut with the lights turning blue behind them and the door locking with a sound that seemed too final for just a debrief. And while they were inside, the others whispered again. Only this time their jokes were thinner, their voices lower, their eyes kept drifting to the door, as if expecting something bad to come out, instead of just another soldier. And when she finally returned, her expression had not changed. But her name had a mark next to it on the roster. A mark no one understood. A mark that looked like a talon drawn in ink so dark it looked burned in. And later, when one of the techs tried to remove it, the system locked up and erased his access completely. But no one talked about that either, because that was the day they learned the commander had written something new in the mission ledger. Something no one had clearance to read, except for 3 people on the base, and even they looked pale when they walked past her after that. Then came the classified briefing, the one scheduled without notice, the one only select squad leaders were invited to, and yet she was already there before the chairs were filled. Sitting in the back, shadowed but clearly present. Her eyes scanning every screen before the feed even began, and when it did, it showed footage no one had seen before. Footage from a failed recon in a country that was never named, involving a unit that was never acknowledged, and the only thing visible in the last frame was a symbol painted in blood on a steel door that looked too thick to breach, and the same Talon Mark etched into it so deep it shook the camera just before the feed. Cut. And the lights came back on with the commander standing at the front, looking not at the footage but at her, like he knew exactly who had made that mark. And when he said, "We are deploying in 6 days," everyone knew who would lead the first team, and no one said a word when her name was called. Because somehow they all understood without being told that the war had not started with them, and would not end with them either. And that maybe they had been placed in her path, not to fight beside her, but to learn why she moved like silence and breathed like death and never ever missed a shot. But none of them dared ask her directly, not even when the sun fell and the desert turned to black and the sound of training fire turned to real thunder echoing off cliffs no one had ever mapped. And when the first recon drone went offline, it was her that the commander turned to, not his second. Not the comms officer, but her, and he handed her a file sealed in red with no title only. A single word printed on the front in ink that bled through the page, black, and beneath it, etched into the folder itself in a script not used by the military, but carved in like a warning, was the word Talon. And that night, while the others slept, she opened it under the low red light of the barracks and read what no one else ever would, a list, not of targets but of events. Things that had happened but were not recorded, names that had vanished from intel maps, entire units erased from history, not because they failed, but because they were never meant to be remembered. And at the bottom of the list, a final page with a single phrase written in her own handwriting, though she had no memory of ever writing it. And the words said, "I am the last one left." The morning after the briefing came with a sky that looked like ash stretched across the earth. Not quite dawn, not quite darkness. And the mood in Echo Base had shifted in a way no one could explain. Drills were quiet conversations. Clipped, even the birds seemed to have flown wide of the perimeter, as if they too could sense the change that had settled over the dirt and concrete like a shadow that did not belong. And in the mess hall they sat in silence, watching her as she took her tray like everyone else, rice, meat, coffee, black, no sugar, no words. Her movement smooth, her posture unreadable, and when she turned to find a seat, every table fell silent and still, until she passed, then resumed in whispers that sounded more like warnings than gossip, because now they had seen what she could do, and none of them wanted to test what else might be buried beneath the calm of her stare. The file the commander had handed her, the one marked Black Talon, had not left her side. And though no one had dared ask what was inside, everyone had theories, the kind that grew legs in the dark and wore uniforms of fear. Some said she was part of a disavowed unit trained in ghost towns where rules did not apply. Others believed she had seen something in the field that the government could not contain, and that her presence on Echo Base meant it had returned, and the most insane among them whispered that she was not assigned here, but released like a failsafe. And even though these were soldiers trained to fight sleep on stone, eat fire, and bleed with smiles, none of them wanted to be within arm's reach of her when the sun dipped low and shadows stretched like knives. That morning her name appeared on the operations board again, this time with a mission code that did not match the others. It had no time, no objective, no squad assigned, only her call sign, written in stark white across a background so black it looked like the screen itself had burned, and beneath it the same strange symbol from the folder etched into the electronic display like it was never meant to be removed. And when the commander entered the room and saw their faces, he said nothing at first, then walked to the board and circled the symbol with his gloved finger and said 4 words. No one there had ever heard spoken aloud. Black Talon Mark engaged, and before anyone could react, the lights dimmed, the comms cut out, and the lockdown protocols sealed every exit with a sound that echoed. Like the end of the world, confusion flooded. The command room orders were shouted, systems rebooted. No one knew what protocol had been triggered, because Black Talon was not in their manuals. And when the emergency generator kicked in only, 3 screens lit up and each showed the same feed from different locations around the base drone footage. Static filled, but clear enough to show the same thing, figures moving just outside. The fence line figures that did not match any known profile humanoid, but wrong too fast, too still, too coordinated, and every time the drones tried to zoom, the feed glitched like the lens itself refused to focus on whatever they were, and then one drone caught a full image for less than a second, and what it captured was enough to freeze the entire room in place. It was a face, or something like a face, but stretched, elongated with no eyes, only smooth bone where sight should be, and it was, looking directly at the drone like it knew it was being watched. And then it opened its mouth not to speak, but to scream, soundless and wide, and the screen shattered from the inside out. Then she stood up, not in fear, not in surprise, but as if she had been waiting for that exact moment, and walked past the chaos of the room toward the weapons cache. Her footsteps unnervingly calm, while officers scrambled around her trying to make sense of the situation, shouting for orders, updates, reinforcements, anything, but the commander said nothing. He just watched her with eyes that had seen too much too long ago. And when she opened the locked case in the far corner, the one sealed with a genetic lock that none of them knew even existed, it hissed open, and inside was not standard gear, but a black suit layered with hex weave and lined with symbols none of them recognized, and a rifle so matte and long it looked like it had been forged from night itself, and she took them without pause assembled. The weapon faster than logic should allow, and turned back to the commander, who finally spoke, and what he said turned their blood to frost. "You do not follow her," he said. "You do not question her. You do not write reports on what she sees, what she hears, or what she does. You will log this as a system drill and nothing more. If I find out anyone leaks what happens next, I will bury your name so deep the alphabet forgets it existed. And if that seems extreme, know this: she is not the threat, she is the answer. And if you try to stop her, we all die faster than we can pray." And then he turned to her and gave a single nod. A nod that was not of command, but of recognition. And she left the room through a door none of them had ever noticed before, and vanished into the underground tunnels beneath the base that even the maps refused to show. No one knows exactly what happened in those next hours, only that the sensors along the perimeter began to fail in sequence, as if something was moving around them, slowly, methodically, testing the edges like fingers tracing the cracks in a window before it shatters, and one by one outposts lost contact. No gunfire, no screams, just silence replaced by static and the occasional burst of distorted audio, something like breathing, mixed with whispers in a language no one could decode. And in the midst of it all, she moved unseen, unheard, only her biometric tag registering briefly at checkpoints deep below the ground and then blinking off again, like a ghost passing through walls, and those who watched the log saw something that made no sense. Her vitals never spiked, never dipped, never showed signs of exertion or fear, even as the base above began to shake, as if the earth itself had begun to reject whatever had come. And then she resurfaced, covered in dirt, but uninjured, eyes brighter than before, and carrying not just her weapon, but a small cube made of metal. None of them could identify, humming with a sound that was not a sound, vibrating at a frequency that made teeth ache and lights flicker, and when she placed it on the command table, the vibrations stopped instantly, and the commander closed the room to everyone but her and 2 intelligence officers who had arrived in an unmarked chopper during the chaos and wore no insignia, spoke in no names, and looked at her with a kind of reverence usually reserved for ancient relics or unexploded bombs. What was discussed in that room was never recorded, what was decided never written. But when the doors reopened and the cube was gone, the commander stepped out and looked 10 years older, his voice rougher and his eyes unfocused, and all he said was, "It is not over. It has only moved. And from now on, this base is under Talon protocol. And anyone not cleared will be reassigned, and if they resist, they will be forgotten." And the soldiers said nothing, because deep down, they already knew that something had changed, not just in the world, but in her, and maybe in all of them, because once you witness the edge of what should not exist, once you see someone walk through hell and return with silence, you never unsee it. And the only question left was whether she had brought something back with her, or whether something had followed her out. The phrase Black Talon Mark had not left the minds of those who heard it, and in the days that followed the lockdown, the soldiers walked softer, spoke less, laughed almost never. Something had settled over Echo Base, a weight like a storm that never broke, and though the skies remained dry and cracked with sun, the air tasted like lightning and silence. The kind that settles just before something happens, something that changes everything. And in that silence, she trained alone her movements, sharper now, more deliberate, every step, calculated, every breath controlled, and no one dared watch her too long because her eyes no longer looked like they saw the world around them. Instead, they looked like they remembered something far worse, and far older files went missing from the archive room. 3 sealed crates were extracted from the underground vault by a recovery unit. No one recognized and no one questioned their presence because the patches they wore were blank, their gear too, clean, too perfect to belong to any ordinary branch of the military. And among the files taken was one marked with a clearance code so high the system scrambled itself when accessed a file containing no photos, no details, just a series of kill counts, and the coordinates of confirmed black sites wiped from the global map, but all linked by a common detail. All of them had a survivor, a single one. And the ID tag of that survivor matched 4 digits burned into the lower edge of her rifle. A rifle that no longer responded to standard biometric scans. And when a technician tried to analyze it, he started bleeding from the nose and passed out before he could explain what he saw. Still, she said nothing. Not when the commander called her into his private war room, not when the intelligence team handed her a dossier stamped with multiple redacted seals, not even when the base itself began to lose power for minutes at a time as if something was draining energy from beneath the concrete, and the lights flickered in a rhythm that felt like code. She opened the folder slowly, methodically, and what she saw inside did not surprise her, though it should have shaken anyone else because it was not just maps and images. It was a sequence, a pattern, of incidents spread across decades involving different names, different locations, but always the same signs: a communications blackout, a total loss of intel, and one survivor. Always one and always missing from the debrief list. They called it an anomaly. They called it a breach. Some even dared to call it a predator, but the truth had no name because what they were facing was not built from logic or origin. It was older than conflict. It was instinct shaped into hunger, and the file contained one last message, a transmission from a ghost team lost in the jungles of Peru. And the voice on the tape was calm at first, describing movement, heat trails impossible to trace, and then it turned to panic as something tore through the squad, and the last words before the feed cut were repeated over and over like a loop, not in English, but in something guttural, broken like a child whispering in reverse, and the only part they could translate was the same name that matched the mark on her rifle, and when she heard it, her fingers tensed, but her face remained calm. Later that night, the soldiers were called to a briefing, but the projector never turned on, the lights remained low, and only the commander spoke. He told them nothing had happened. He told them it was a routine systems failure. He told them Echo Base was returning to normal operations, but none of them believed him, not because of what he said, but because of what he did not say, and because she was not in the room. And when they checked the logs, her tag was gone again. Not inactive, just absent, like she had left time itself for a while. And when she did return hours later, there was something different about her uniform. A faint smear across her left shoulder. Something that looked like ash but shimmered in infrared, and no one asked what it was, because when she walked past them, the air felt heavier, and the lights above her flickered twice and then died completely. The security feed caught one frame of her entering the archive room, a blur of movement followed by a pulse of distortion, and when the guards arrived, the room was empty, but the far wall had been marked with a symbol drawn not with ink or paint, but with something burned into the steel, as if carved by heat, not fire, and the symbol matched the one from the drone feed from days before the one on the creature with no face. And yet this time the lines were not symmetrical. They were broken, cracked as if whatever had drawn it had been wounded or marked, and the commander stared at it for a long time before ordering the wall sealed and the footage erased. And that night he placed a call not through normal channels, but through a cold line buried deep in the emergency net. And the person who answered spoke only one sentence before hanging up. It has already touched her. The next morning, she was waiting at the edge of the airfield, staring out toward the mountains, her weapon slung over her shoulder and her eyes fixed on something, invisible. And when the scout team approached, she turned to them, slowly, nodded once and began walking toward the ridge without waiting for orders and though protocol, demanded a report and a chain of command. No one stopped her. Not even the lieutenant with 20 years on the ground, because something in her silence spoke louder than any command, and they followed her, even though they did not know why, and even though the valley they entered was not marked on any map, and the heat sensors failed to read the terrain, and the compasses spun in slow circles. And at the heart of that valley was a cave, wide and dark, and whispering air that did not match the weather around it. She signaled for silence, then for a split team, then disappeared into the cave alone, and for hours there was nothing, just static over comms and the kind of silence that stretches into dread. And then the signal returned, but not hers. It was the sound of breathing again, slow and layered like something mimicking what it thought humans sounded like, and the team above drew weapons but did not retreat because none of them wanted to leave her behind. And then she stepped out. Covered in dust and blood not her own, dragging something behind her, something metal and round and broken, something that used to be a reconnaissance drone but had been torn open, not crushed, not shot, but peeled like fruit, and inside the remains was a single black stone no larger than a coin, pulsing with heat and light and silence. And when she handed it to the tech specialist, he collapsed immediately. No pulse, no signs of trauma. And when they scanned his body, the internal systems showed. His neural patterns had burned out like a circuit, and the last image his optic recorder saw was not the stone, but her face standing over him with eyes wide and black as void. They airlifted her back under full quarantine protocols, but she showed no signs of infection, no stress, no deviation in behavior, except that now she slept, standing up, and spoke only in one word, sentences. And when asked where she found the drone, she replied only with a whisper. Not a location, but a name. Not hers. Not theirs, just a name. None of them recognized, but the commander did, because he went pale and muttered that it had been erased from every record decades ago, and that no one should remember it. Not even her. And when she looked at him, he knew then that she had not remembered it. She had never forgotten it, and something had just awakened that memory inside her like a key turning in a lock they had buried too deep. And then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of paper folded many times over and on. It written in black ink with a hand that was not hers were 4 words: "It is not alone." She stood at the edge of the mountain with the wind pulling through her hair like fingers made of cold and memory, her boots planted in the soil, as if something beneath it had called her there, and the paper with those 4 words still folded in her hand, now soft and worn, as if it had aged 100 years in a single night. She said nothing, not to the soldier standing beside her, not to the wind, not even to herself. And when the team behind her asked what now, she did not answer. She only looked toward the black mouth of the collapsed cave down the ridge, her eyes tracing the lines of stone that had once been smooth, now broken like a wound. And she began moving down without a word, without hesitation, and they followed because they had seen her walk into fire and come out colder than when she entered. Each step down felt like stepping through time, the dust thicker, the air thinner, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. And when they reached the edge of the collapse, they found more than they expected, not just rubble and rock, but remnants of tech-twisted metal, crushed helmets, pieces of comm equipment still pinging. In silence, as if trying to reach ghosts, the kind of wreckage that should have been recorded weeks ago but had somehow vanished from every feed, from every drone, from every sat link, and in the middle of it all were marks. Not random, not natural. Marks carved into the walls in perfect circles and spirals, as if something had written its thoughts across stone in a language only the dark could understand. And when she saw them, she froze. Not with fear, not with recognition, but with understanding. Like remembering the lines of a song you did not know you knew. She stepped forward, hand brushing the marks, tracing their edges, and then she knelt, placed her palm flat against the center, and the stone pulsed once like a heartbeat, then again, and then a sound began to rise from the rubble, not loud, not clear a vibration, more than a voice that settled deep into the teeth and bones of the squad, a hum that grew colder the longer it lasted, and then the ground cracked beneath them just slightly, but enough. And the lieutenant called for retreat, but she did not move. Instead, she whispered a single word, and the sound stopped immediately, and when they asked what she said, she told them it was not a word. It was a key, and the stone shifted, revealing a narrow passage, not natural, not formed by collapse, but built with smooth lines and inhuman angles. And she looked back once, her face calm, her voice even, and said, "It is awake now, and it knows we are here." They followed because they knew turning back would not help. Not anymore. The rules of this mission had changed the moment her file was opened, the moment that cube touched the table, and inside the passage the temperature dropped to the point where breath turned to fog and skin to numb. Silence pressing in from all sides, and not one of them dared speak, and she led them deeper. Each step echoing like a footstep in an empty cathedral. Each corner turned, revealing more marks, more symbols, more architecture that defied sense structures. Too precise, too ancient, too smooth. And when they reached the chamber at the heart of the mountain, they found what should not have existed. A sphere floating in the center of the room, made of the same black stone from the drone, but pulsing brighter, as if feeding off their presence. And around it the remains of something human, half a suit torn open, half a body still clutching a weapon that no one could identify, and carved into the chest plate again, that same mark, that talon symbol burned deep, as if seared by intention. She stepped forward, and the sphere reacted, spinning faster, glowing hotter, the vibrations causing the walls to hum and the dust to rise, and she placed the folded paper on the ground beneath it, and the sphere stopped mid-air, frozen not in motion but in decision, and then slowly began to descend, and when it touched the paper, it shattered, not with noise, but with light, a light that did not shine, but consumed, and in that moment each soldier saw something not with their eyes, but with their minds, flashes of images not theirs, memories not theirs, wars not from Earth, sounds not made for human ears, and through it all, one shape, one constant, a figure moving through fire and shadow, always watching, always walking, always alone. And then the light vanished, and the chamber was dark again, and when their eyes adjusted, she was standing where the sphere had been, and her eyes were closed but glowing faintly with that same black shimmer, as if the light had gone into her. They did not speak, they did not move. They simply waited as she opened her eyes again and said, It has chosen. And then the chamber began to collapse. Not like a cave-in, but like a system shutting down walls, folding inward passageways, sealing behind them. And she led them out through a path that had not been there before, and by the time they reached the surface, the sun was low, and the sky burning orange, and the mountain behind them silent once more, as if it had never been opened. And when they returned to base, the commander was already waiting, standing at the edge of the landing pad, with a look that said he had known they would come back, but not as they were. And when she stepped off the transport, he saluted her not out of protocol, but out of something deeper, something like fear, and said only 2 words to her. "You remember?" And she nodded once and replied, "I always have." She was taken to the lower levels of the base beneath the old hangars, into a room lined with screens that showed nothing but static. A place never used, a place locked since the Cold War. And the commander handed her a folder sealed in wax thicker than her palm. And inside was a photo, a blurry satellite image showing something moving through the snow, in a place with no name, and the symbol again drawn into the ice beside the wreckage of a plane, and scrawled in the corner of the image in handwriting that matched her own, were the same words from the paper. "It is not alone," and she stared at it for a long time before folding the photo and placing it into her jacket and saying, "We have 6 days." And when the commander asked how she knew, she looked at him with those new eyes and said, "Because it is already coming." That night, the base lost contact with an outpost in the north. A weather station monitored only by drone, and the feed that returned was corrupted, filled with static and flashes of what looked like movement beneath the ice, and one clear frame showing a silhouette standing beside the tower. Not human, not beast, something taller. Something bent forward and holding something that looked like the missing drone, and then the feed cut permanently, and the emergency lights came on across Echo Base, not red, not yellow, but blue. And everyone who saw them knew what that meant, because blue meant one thing: the return of a protocol never meant to be used again. Talon-class event, and the only person with full clearance was her. She stood at the edge of the command deck, now suited, not in standard armor, but in something different. The same suit she had taken from the sealed vault. But now it pulsed faintly with every movement, and across her shoulder a new mark etched into the fabric itself. Not printed, not stitched, but grown. And behind her the squad stood ready, not out of duty, not out of rank, but out of something more like instinct, and when the commander asked her where they were going, she pointed at the map and said only the old name. The name that had been erased, the one she had spoken in the cave. And when he heard it, he did not argue. He only nodded and told the others to prepare for full blackout and to pray not to win, but to come back with minds still whole. As the transport engines roared and the lights above the base flickered again, she stared into the distance, eyes scanning the sky as if waiting for something, and when the clouds shifted and a shadow passed over the sun, she whispered something. No one heard. Something that made the storm change direction. Something that made the radios begin to bleed static, and the ground tremble just slightly. And the only clear word, in the garbled signal, was a name not hers, not his, not theirs, but something buried deep in the earth, now stirring again, now watching again and waiting to be remembered. The sky was wrong when they arrived. Not in color or shape, but in weight, as if it had thickened. Somehow as if the clouds themselves knew what slept below and did not want to be part of it. The transport landed without flare engines cutting out as if afraid to be heard, and she stepped down first, boots hitting the ice with the same quiet certainty. She had carried since the first day she arrived at Echo Base the squad behind her, moving like shadows across a frozen wasteland that was once a radar station. Now nothing but shattered metal and cracked towers, half swallowed by snow and silence. The wind moving through broken frames like breath through dying lungs. And still she said nothing. Her eyes locked onto a ridge where no footprints should have been, and yet were clear, as if something had walked there recently. Something heavy. Something not built to walk at all. They moved in formation, rifles raised, comms open, though no one spoke, and when they reached the outer perimeter, the air changed again, thinner, sharper, the kind of cold that did not sting, but invaded and at the center of what used to be the main facility. They found a hatch buried in the snow, not part of the original build, not on any blueprint, circular metal thick, and marked with that same symbol, not etched, but formed into the surface like it had been grown instead of forged, and when she touched it, it opened without noise or pressure. Just a low hum, like a voice trying to remember how to speak, and inside there was only blackness, so complete it looked solid, and she turned to them then and said only one thing. This is where it began. The descent was silent. The walls too smooth, too precise, the stairs too perfect to be human, and at the bottom, a chamber that did not match any known construction material, stone, that shimmered metal that rippled under touch, and light that came from nowhere, and at the center a single chair, too large for a man, too small for a god, and beside it a body, or what was left of one draped in remnants of armor. So old the symbols had faded except for one, the talon burned into the forehead, as if it had been branded post-mortem, and she knelt beside it, placed 2 fingers to the ground and closed her eyes, and for a moment no one moved, and then the walls began to shift slowly, forming new lines, new symbols reacting to her. Presence and the air began to pulse with that same hum, but now layered, now deeper, as if something beneath this place was not just aware, but waiting. The commander spoke through the comm, barely a whisper, asking, "What do you see?" And she responded, not in words, but in a language. None of them knew her voice, layered and distant like an echo heard underwater, and then the floor opened, not with sound, not with warning, and they were falling, not down, not up, but across, as if direction had ceased to exist. And when they landed, they were in another chamber, one not made of stone or steel, but of memory scenes playing on the walls around them. Not videos, not projections, but moments, real ones from places none of them had ever seen soldiers running. Through forests filled with ash, cities burning under skies that bled red, and at the center of each scene, always a figure, always the same shape, eyes glowing black, moving through the fire untouched and unchallenged, and she stepped forward, reached into the air, and pulled one of the images toward her, and when she did, the chamber trembled, and a voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You were the first," said the voice, not in accusation, but in acknowledgement, and she stood still, eyes fixed on a new shape forming in the far wall, a doorway that had not been there now opening like an eye, and behind it something moved, something slow, something massive, its presence bending the air around it, and when it stepped into view, every weapon in the room, overloaded screens turned to static, radios burst into flame, and still she did not flinch. She stepped toward it, and it stopped, and they stood facing one another, 2 forms, one human, one not yet somehow bound, not by hatred or alliance, but by memory. It spoke again this time in her voice, though she did not move, and what it said made the squad freeze. "You carried us, you left us, you forgot." And she answered, not with denial, but with truth. "I did not forget. I was made to forget." The creature stepped closer, shifting between forms, flickering through faces, places, battles, all of them ending in silence, and she reached into her jacket, pulled the folded photo and unfolded it once more. And as the wind passed through the open door, it lifted from her hand and burned mid-air, the ashes spiraling into the chest of the creature, and then something cracked not in the air but in the space between them, and she stepped forward, touched its face, and whispered a name not recorded, not remembered, and it froze. And for the first time it looked afraid. Then came the sound, Not from the creature, not from her, but from the earth itself. A roar of energy rising from below like something deep and endless was waking up. Not one thing, but many. And the chamber began to fracture, light leaking through the cracks. Not white, not red, but something older, something pure. And she turned to the squad, told them to run, not with fear, but with purpose. And they did not argue, did not hesitate, because they could feel it too. The change, the unraveling, and she stayed behind. Hand still on the creature, eyes still locked, and when the door slammed shut behind them, the mountain trembled once more, and a flash rose through the ice like a scream, without sound, and then silence. The squad emerged alone, disoriented, stumbling into snow that had begun to fall, even though no clouds remained above, and the commander met them at the evac point, eyes scanning the line once, twice, and when he did not see her, he said nothing. Just turned and boarded the chopper, and as they lifted off, someone asked what was down there, and the commander said only the truth. And when they asked what she was, he looked at the white void below and said something we never should have made weeks past. And Echo Base was shut down, personnel reassigned, files, erased, equipment buried under steel and concrete. And officially, nothing had happened. No event, no mission, no name recorded, and yet across the world, strange. Signals began to pulse from old machines. Places long thought abandoned began to wake up, and one by one those who had once worn the Talon began to vanish, called by something deeper, something ancient, something unfinished. And one day, in a remote corner of a desert long forgotten, a man found a photograph half-burned, caught on a fence post by the wind, and in it was a group of soldiers standing beside a mountain. All of them blurred except one, a woman in black eyes fixed on the camera as if staring through it, and scrawled across the back were 4 words written in a hand the world would never recognize again. She is not gone.